Today I'm speaking with Dr. Kara Cooney. Dr. Cooney, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.
Absolutely. It's an honor to meet you. I've seen you so many times on Derek's channel, Derek with MythVision, and you're doing great work there and in so many other places. But we just appreciate you being here today to share your story. And I'm going to start with a quick bio. Dr. Cooney is from Texas, and she and her husband now live in Los Angeles. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in German and Humanities from the University of Texas at Austin, and she earned her PhD in Egyptology from Johns Hopkins University. She is a professor of Egyptian art and architecture at UCLA, focusing on death preparations, afterlife beliefs, and gender studies. She is chair of the Department of Near Eastern Language and Cultures at UCLA. She is an archaeologist and has spent many years at various excavations in Egypt, and her research has taken her around the world to study in cities like Cairo, London, Paris, Berlin, and Vatican City. In 2005, she was the co-curator of the Tutankhamun and the Golden Age of the Pharaohs exhibit in LA. She has been on television quite a bit. She's hosted two Discovery Channel documentary series, one called Out of Egypt and the other called Egypt's Lost Queen. She's also been a guest on several television talk shows, sharing her story and her insights. And she has several books, including The Cost of Death, The Social and Economic Value of Ancient Egyptian Funerary Art in the Ramesside Period, The Woman Who Would Be King, When Women Ruled the World, The Six Queens of Egypt, and The Good Kings, Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World. I'll have the links for all that. Please go check out her website and buy her book, subscribe, and all that. But before we get into your story, Dr. Cooney, if you could just tell us some fun things about yourself.
I just got back from Japan, where my husband had us go on many, I call them death marches, where my stepdaughter, she's like, we walked 30,000 steps today. That was the worst.
Wow.
But Japan is beautiful. We went to Kyoto. That was my first time in Kyoto, my third time in Japan. And yeah, it was really fun. It was really good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's definitely on my bucket list to get over there at some point. I've been down to New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, but never up to the higher part of the world.
Wow. Well, I'd love to go to Papua New Guinea someday.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you could, we'd love to hear people's stories. I know most of the time when I hear your name come up, you're talking about Egypt and the pharaohs and so forth. But I would love to just hear your personal story. How did you get exposed to Christianity, and what's your journey been like with that whole world?
Yeah, so unlike you and Derek, and I assume you grew up evangelical Christian,
Very
is
much
that
so.
correct? Yeah. So unlike you and Derek, I did not grow up evangelical Christian. I grew up Catholic, Roman Catholic, and very much in opposition to evangelical Christianity. And for some of our younger listeners, I think it may come as a surprise that when I grew up in Texas, being Catholic in Houston, Texas was very much like being Jewish in Alabama. We were not included in the evangelical young life circles. We were specifically excluded and considered evil papists. It is only recently that with white supremacy, or the last gasps of white supremacy in the United States, that we've really seen the binds that tie Christians together, white Christians in particular, but sometimes Christians of color from a more patriarchal perspective in a cultural way. These are new, these ties that bind now. Supreme Court, for example, is mostly Roman Catholic, and that's where so much of that conservatism comes from. But growing up, I saw myself in opposition to something much more conservative than what I was growing up with, which gives one a kind of superiority complex. I think growing up as a minority, I know it's weird to think of myself as a minority, but I very much was at my high school, thinking of myself as one of the people who who accepted the theory of evolution as it was presented to me then, who saw no problems with the world as we know it being billions of years old rather than thousands of years old. Those things gave me an intellectual superiority, and those were confirmed and affirmed within my family group in Houston, Texas. My real name is Kathleen Mary Cooney, so that you can't get more Irish Catholic than that. And then on my mom's side, I'm Italian Catholic, so Italian American Catholic, of course. So my name, Kathleen Mary Cooney, is my grandmother's married name. She was Kathleen Mary Price, and she grew up in Iowa as an Anglican Protestant. So think of Ireland and how it's split between the Catholics and the Protestants. My grandmother, Kathleen Mary Price, grew up Protestant, English, Anglican Church, the ascendancy, and she fell in love with James Cooney, who was Catholic. And amongst the Irish, the Anglican colonial occupying ascendancy, even in the United States, considered themselves superior to the dirty Catholics. So her marrying this Catholic man was an affront to the entire family, and she was disowned, later brought back into the fold, but really disowned. And she converted, of course, and there is no zealot like the convert, as they say. And I grew up with a grandmother who was full of fire and brimstone, but in a Roman Catholic way. And it is possible to be full of fire and brimstone in a Roman Catholic way, and I will get there. But, I remember growing up and being in biology class in Texas and having a neighbor who would blow by me in her Mercedes every day on the way to school while I was waiting for the bus. I remember her crying for my soul because I believed in evolution and thus was going to go to hell. And I remember being invited to a Young Life group where all of these bitchy girls would highlight their Bibles, and I didn't understand all of this. I didn't grow up with a scriptural understanding of religion. I grew up with a more mystical Catholic understanding of religion, which I do hold to this day. This is about atheists, but I'm not an atheist. I just don't accept this religious belief anymore. I believe in a lot, but I don't know how to exactly talk about what that is, and I don't push it on anybody else. And but getting back to my story, so I went to the University of Notre Dame, and you can imagine what Notre Dame. I say Notre Dame. Everyone says Notre Dame, right?
Right.
The French is gone. And for anybody who understands how cultures are formed, this kind of cohesion, particularly a white cohesion, upper middle class white cohesion that you get at Notre Dame. I showed up a pretty decent Catholic, not understanding that the Catholicism I loved was very much a polytheism, Mother Mary worship, different saints and things like that. I wasn't really into God the Father and fire and brimstone, but there were other ways. Catholics are not monotheists; they're very much polytheists. Though there is a new evangelical version of Catholicism, but it's a very magical religion if you can find certain ways into it. Post-Vatican II makes it a little hard because it is so much more literal and you can understand everything that's going on, which in a way is unfortunate. But I probably would have enjoyed a Latin Mass and would have learned Latin earlier, but neither here nor there. Those Catholics are the worst, in my opinion, socially right now. So I get to Notre Dame and I hated it. And so when you grow up as a minority, in opposition to something else, then you can accept it. And you're like, oh, this is my clan. This is my tribe. This is where I belong. I'm not one of those crazy evangelicals. And this is also a time in the 80s when everyone went to church. Now it's who doesn't go to church and who does go to church. And that really divides the United States. When I was growing up, it was which church you went to because everyone went somewhere. And all of the kids in Houston, a very cosmopolitan city with whom I grew up, were either Jewish or Hindu or Muslim or Catholic, like something different like me. And I hung out with the nerdy kids, right? So I was there with all the other immigrant kids. And it's strange that, I remember in school bringing chicken cacciatore that my grandmother had made to school in the Tupperware, and all the other kids making fun of me. And I know I'm as white as could be, white AF. And yet I kind of had a kinship with the Filipino Catholic kids who were like, oh yeah, I brought my smelly adobo or whatever to school and they made fun of me too. And all the kids with their Vlasic pickles and crusts cut off. So I took in a lot of those cultural differences. But once I left that minority and went to being part of the majority at Notre Dame, I rejected it instantly. I hated it. And I now, in retrospect, look back at Notre Dame and realize I was there in the Notre Dame when Bill Barr was coming up, when Amy Coney Barrett was coming up. And it was that Notre Dame that was looking towards, that John Paul II Notre Dame that was looking towards a hardline conservative, anti-woman, anti-LGBTQ, anti-progressivism edge. And that was not where I was interested in going. And my Catholicism, boom, was gone. And I rejected it very much with both hands and left Notre Dame, caused a schism within my own family, kind of like a Kathleen Mary Price of old, right? when I think about it now.
Yeah,
It's kind
the
of
trend
funny,
continues.
right? I hadn't exactly thought about that. But caused a schism where I really didn't talk to my parents, even though I had to move home and when I left Notre Dame and transferred to UT Austin. Um, we didn't really speak for years. And UT Austin, going there was like going to the evangelical belly of the beast for my family. It was like, talk about being a turncoat, a betrayer of your family roots and all that you were brought up to believe in. But I found more of a space for myself at UT Austin, a more progressive way of looking at the world there than I ever would have found in South Bend, Indiana. So I put my head down. I studied hard. I was only there for 2.5 years. And I got a full tuition ride at Johns Hopkins and did my PhD work in Baltimore, a very Catholic place, but never went to church there and never looked back. So you can ask me more specific questions about the Catholic journey. I think it's a very interesting one. And I've since, as an adult and having been through a lot more normal human trauma like divorce and having to deal with uh, co-parenting with somebody I find difficult, during all of that, I think I found a different kind of spirituality that's very much my own. But
Hmm.
but yeah, I'll
I,
let you. But
I
you
definitely want to hear about the spirituality part of it and where you've landed. Just going back a few steps, just for context.
yeah, yeah.
When you were a Catholic, was there a sense to you that this was just like a cultural family thing or religion, or was there any sense of you having like a communion or a relationship with God or the saints or Mary? Like how intimate did it feel? Not in the sense of what when everyone's watching, but just you and the quietness of your heart with your Bible or something, your prayer time at night. What was it like between you and God?
It was two things, one or the other. I remember I was just thinking about this the other day when I was a child, and I probably was like 6 or 7. And I remember knowing that you shouldn't pray for things. And I remember and I would hear people going, I mean, not that every kid is praying for a freaking pony or whatever, but they're praying for something, right? And I was like, no, you don't, that's not the way it works. That's not what this isn't magical. Like I say this and that comes out the other end. That's not how it works. And I remember being a very small child and praying for wisdom, which is weird. And that's where my faith, however you understand it, that stillness would go. And and yet, and I don't know quite how to understand this, so you can maybe help me through it. When I was about 12, maybe a little younger, the babysitter let us stay up and watch this. Maybe I was 10, way too young. I saw The Exorcist on TV, and they had a safe for TV moment where she's not impaling herself with the crucifix, but it's still, it's a brutal movie for a child to
Yeah,
watch. And
intense.
it's and then you realize how the evangelicals are very similar to Catholics in that way, because it is all about fear of evil, the evil outside of yourself, fear of the devil that is not you, right?
Hmm.
And that you can be taken over by this thing unless you do X, Y, and Z. And so that movie, that experience, but also growing up with, I went to Catholic school first through fifth grade. And I remember the nuns telling me I had to love God more than my parents. I did not believe that. And I remember being young and going, you can try to tell me that, but I'm not going to accept it. Um, little things like that. Again, I grew up in a post-Vatican II Catholic church, but I still had a nun named Sister John Michael hitting me on the head with puppets, and making us
Wow.
do like, not hard, but she still hit us on the head with puppets. And those Catholic sorts of ways of running a disciplined school environment and never teaching you science. We never I didn't learn science until I went to public school in the 6th grade. And then I loved it. I was like, what is this science? And I went hardcore into geology and was like one of the best students in the geology course, whatever, in the 6th grade.
Hmm.
It was great.
Did
But
you did
yeah,
you
go
have like
ahead.
any sense of like just how Protestants, evangelicals will focus a lot on this as a relationship with God. This is all about God's love for you. Did you ever sense that you were in like a personal relationship or just at least a very loving theological contract, as it were, with God that He's definitely going to save you and take you to heaven, or like how did that work with you?
No, I wasn't taught that. And I
Okay.
wasn't, there was very little of this. We have to save your soul and I would pray. So I would either pray for wisdom when I was like 7 or 8 or whatever. And then I would pray not to be possessed by the devil, right?
It's a good
Please
starting
don't let
point.
me be, right? I just went right to that. Please don't let me be possessed by the devil. Oh my God, right? So there was, and this personal relationship with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, no way, no. Um, there, it was more of an individual contract in that you had to not commit certain sins. You had to make sure you went to church on Sunday. You had to take your Eucharist once you had your first communion, and we learned what the bad sins were, et cetera, et cetera. But it was more of a rule following kind of contract. And I didn't even grow up with uh oh my God, what do you call it when you go into the sacrament of confession?
Confession.
Confession. I didn't grow up with confession. So I didn't have to go in and say, it's been this many days since my confession and I have done this and that and the other. However, it was very much about which sins you had committed. That's a much more Catholic guilt kind of thing. So it's not like, oh, my individual relationship with Jesus Christ, he's like Santa Claus and sees everything. He is like Santa Claus and sees everything. But it was a much more amorphous understanding of what divinity was. And when I went to church as a young person, I wanted to pray to Mary. So and Mary was there. There was a statue of Mary there, and I could go in that direction, and no one was upset about that. There was a chapel for Mary or whatever, and that was fine. And it didn't have to be all about the bloody Jesus Christ, though I appreciated the Catholics were all about the blood sacrifice. That was pretty interesting. And I remember being rather obsessed with the magic of the Catholic Church, which has really been pushed out of much of the evangelical spaces, though the Mormons have tried to bring it back, I would argue, but only for the men and the male toxicity. But the magic, I remember asking my dad as a child, he's like, oh, this is the sacrament, and Jesus is now the bread. And I'm like, well, how does it get in there? And he said, it's a mystery. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And so this mystery confused me, but you as a child accept it rather. And I was taught about magical things like you put the host in your mouth and you now have God in your body. So it's more magical mechanics. And as an Egyptologist, I can see this quite clearly. That
Yeah.
when you need a spell for healing or something, then you write down what it is you need, you dissolve the ink in the beer, you drink the beer, and then you'll be healed in that way. And this is very much what Catholic Christianity was like. And I'm reading a biography right now about Thomas Cromwell and looking at the move from Catholicism to a Protestant Lutheran perspective, and the Tyndale Bible in English and all of these things. And when the Tyndale Bible comes out, all of the learned men are like, you guys, look, there's no monks and nuns. There's nothing about Jesus being the bread except one small little thing. There's no communion. There's nothing here about confession. All of the things that are Catholicism, culturally, the everyday rituals are not there in the Bible. It is an extraordinary thing how much magical reality has been built up around it, how much ritual has been built up around it. And
Yeah.
that was very much my world. And my biblical access was certainly not picking up a Bible. That's something that Protestants would do. We would hear the Old Testament in one reading and the New Testament in another reading in the Mass, and it was parsed for us in the homily. And that was how we went about things. We weren't meant to have a one-on-one relationship with Christ or with the scripture even. We were meant to hear it from our authoritarian intellectual betters who explained it to us, and that was the way we were meant to go about things. In some ways, I think it's easier to then break away from it because you just get a little anti-authoritarian and you can walk away and you can take some of the spirituality with you. I think there's less baggage compared to the evangelical upbringing, but it depends. I also wasn't sexually abused by a priest who used that religion to control me. So I think it's easier for me to say those kinds of things.
Yeah. Did you have a sense that you were definitely safe enough in your relationship with God, whatever that did or didn't look like that you were at least going to heaven? Did you have a sense that heaven was waiting for you, or at least a very short trip to purgatory and then to heaven?
We didn't talk a lot about purgatory post Vatican II. My parents did. And to be honest, heaven scared the shit out of me.
Hmm.
Heaven terrified me. And I remember being very young and thinking about trying to understand what heaven was, because it was told to me as you will exist in this beautiful space forever and ever. And so I imagined this cloud lit perfect space where we got to do whatever we want and play Monopoly with mom and dad. They would never play Monopoly, right? So you could just do that all the time. That was some idea I had. And then I dwelled on the forever and ever. And I would put my mind into this space where I really tried to see what eternity was. And it freaked me out. And I knew I did not want to be in that forever and ever eternal space. And here we'll get a little bit to my own spirituality. Quite young, I knew that reincarnation was a better way for me to understand the world, and that living and existing, like having one shot at it and then going forever and ever and ever, or to hell forever and ever, was cruel, simplistic, and stupid. That this isn't the way any energetic system of human learning and growth would go. That in my understanding, even as a young child, coming back again and again and again made much more sense. And my grandmother on my Italian side believed the same. And so we would talk about this idea of, oh, in my past life, like as a funny haha thing in the 70s, right? But we both did believe that, and
Hmm.
and joke about your past lives and things like that. And oh, and I'll come back as, right? And we did not grow up Hindu. We did not grow up with any sort of past life theology. In fact, it's probably very anti-Catholic to think these things. But the idea of all Hindus going to hell was ridiculous to me. And I remember having a conversation with an evangelical neighbor who said, "Oh no, you're going to go to hell." And I said, "Really? You think all Hindus are going to go to hell?" She's like, "Absolutely." I'm like, "Okay, peace out, bye. I have no interest in this." I knew as a young person that was stupid, and I knew as a young person that what the church told me about any of this heaven and hell bullshit was bullshit. I believed in the devil. I was terrified of that. That this idea of forever hell and forever heaven, I rejected both of them equally with equal ferocity and equal fright. So the heaven part it wasn't much of a carrot as opposed to that hell stick. Both of them scared the shit out of me. I didn't want to be sitting in a cloud forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I don't think it would teach anybody anything.
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
interesting
so
how many
that
people tell me that exact story or that exact sentiment, that they felt like the idea of it going on forever, and especially the idea of people saying that there's no way that it won't get boring to the point of absurdity eventually. But my theology, my context was a little bit different. I definitely wanted to go, and I tell people I still just the concept I had of it was very, very different. But I definitely understand what you mean. Yeah, the idea that's, especially if you're thinking, especially as a kid, this church service is so boring. Like, are we going to sing the same songs again and again and again? But did you at least have the sense that then that you were on God's good side? So God, what, you didn't think you were going to go to hell?
I didn't think I was going to go to hell. No, I rejected that. I just
Okay.
worried about, I guess, the devil part. It's interesting. I worried about an individual sort of loss of control, or something coming in and taking control of me, but I didn't think I would get dragged down to hell forever and ever and ever. And I did not contemplate on, oh, I'm going to hell forever and ever. That wasn't, no pits of fire or anything like that. I worried about losing my individual voice and person. That was very frightening to me. And thus the devil story was very much a trope of my childhood in my mind. And I wonder if that also coincides with a regular girl's life of having very little voice or say in community and society, and feeling like you really have no control, that some male, it's always a male devil who's going to invade you. I was always very self-protective, and didn't, I wasn't that kid who slept around. I wasn't that kid who snuck off and did pot or anything else. And my high school had ample access to all kinds of drugs in the 80s. And I was a very good girl, not because I was prissy, but because I was very worried about any sort of loss of my own autonomy in and I think growing up Catholic and seeing how all these male devils could come around and invade your space, you're just a little girl doing nothing. That was very real to me. And now existing in a patriarchal, late stage patriarchal space, I feel it's correct. It's just me analogizing something in a mythological way, but it is very real. And to see so many women around me sell their souls for beauty, for power, for wealth, and sell their power away willingly with both hands, I think is repugnant. But I think it's that devil invading. I think it's very real. In the same way, when I, as an Egyptologist, they're like, "You believe in the Exodus story?" I'm like, "Hell's yes." It helps us understand the late Bronze Age collapse and the loss of Pharaoh's power, unlike anything else. It's everyone trying to come to grips with the diminishment of the strongest power in the Mediterranean world. Does that mean that the Red Sea parted and Moses walked through it and all of this? No, but it is absolutely a true story in its analogizing basics. So I'll go with The Exorcist being like a patriarchal story of loss of feminine power.
Mm. It's amazing how you're talking about the magical side of it and the things you could relate to that with Egyptology. But it's interesting too. The word animism comes to mind, where when you look at tribal people that live primarily in like jungle environments, remote environments, a lot of them don't care to actually like worship a god where they're like that god is worth bowing down to. They just want to be aware of which gods or spirits are out there, and they want to do their magic tricks to get the bad ones to ignore them and not hurt them, and the good ones to bless them in some way. And it almost seems like there's some corollaries to not just magic but to animism, where we're doing these little things. You say your prayer and you literally moving the beads along, and everything from that to even just culturally stuff like knock on wood. But you do things to kind of ward off the evil spirits. And it's amazing how we're so, in some ways, so primitive still with our beliefs, even though we're feeling like we're such a modern society. A lot of this stuff is still woven into our DNA, as it were.
I don't care how atheist you think you are, you still do magical things all the time. I just had
Yeah.
this discussion with my graduate students. I'm like, I just went through the whole Dodgers thing here in Los Angeles. And, you could have people who completely reject any idea of divinity out there. And they've still got their hat upside down and backwards because they think that, in this inning or that moment or wearing this shirt or that thing, everyone's doing magical things all the time. And this is where when it comes down to it, I think a lot of Catholicism that I grew up with is a magical reality. And what is magical action but a cause and effect? Using what is around you in the world, intention in your mind, speech and utterance, to bind that together to create a reality that you want and or need. And cause and effect, it goes back to the past life thing that I was so attracted to as a child and still do believe in, that you reap what you sow. You get what you deserve. And I still do believe that. It doesn't mean that billionaires aren't billionaires, but it means that most of them aren't very happy. And you can see that most of them aren't very happy. And there is actually that bell curve, right? Where you see that the poor people are unhappy, the rich people are very unhappy, and the people kind of in the middle are doing the best in terms of mental health. And that's just a cause and effect. Do you want to call it karma? Do you want to call it a magical sort of give and take, that somebody has a better relationship with the world around them? Potentially, yes. Understanding they have to give to get. And so Catholicism is, I did my rosary as a child. I was taught that. And I did find that comforting. I didn't do it a lot, but having a rosary in my hand, I found really comforting. I really liked that. And moving the beads along, I like that. I love a Buddhist rosary as well. And there's a Muslim rosary. There's all these beads, right? And
Didn't know that.
and yeah, and I have a little altar in my house and I light a candle. Am I reaching out to a particular spirit to have a personal relationship? No, I'm just kind of lighting my candle for, just to create a nice environment and space in my home. And when I was in Japan, every little animist temple that I walked by, I visited, and everyone made fun of me and the family because I would go up and pray and give my little coin and pray to the little fox god. And then I would go up and the hedgehog god. And then I would get my my Google Translate out and read the little sign. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to touch the part of the board where I'm ailing. And so I would try to do that. And I love it. I love it. So that kind of connection with the spirit world, I think, is also our cause and effect. I think if we connected more animistically with the trees and the rivers and the ground on which we stand, I think we would see a forest as valuable within the trees rather than seeing the forest as valuable within the lumber that you sell at Home Depot for the shareholders' profit, right? And
Yeah.
and we're destroying the world by not having this connection with the spirit energy around us, however you understand it. And it sounded very woo what I just said, but I'll stand by it and also comment on when that woo sounds uncomfortable. I think mostly it's because it's been commodified in a white woman yoga commodification of this is how you can get ahead in a magical thinking sort of way. And I reject that too. So it's complicated out there. And yet not. And yet not.
Well, I'm just curious, just since we're on the topic, how do you perceive someone like, Richard Dawkins or someone else who would be more of a materialist? I'm certainly in that category where we're more materialist atheists, nihilists, so to speak. Do you think that there's some things where we need to see a more magical, mystical side to life, or like, do you think there's contributions that can be had from a more materialistic view?
I think a materialist view is fine. It doesn't work for me, though I lived that way for many years of my life. And I did believe for a good decade that we come into this body, we're animals, we die, we rot in the ground, it's done, it's it. And most of the people in my community who believed the same were some of the most moral people I knew. People who wouldn't screw a friend over to get something, who in that materialist space had great respect for the short time that they might have this consciousness in this world. So I don't think that it's bad. I just think that sometimes one needs to exist in that space, and I needed to exist in that space too. And that's all well and good. I think that there are limitations for me in that space come a certain point. And there was a moment in my life when all of that opened up, and I was 42 years old. I remember very clearly when all of that opened up for me, and I realized there was much more in this world than I had imagined. And I'm an intellectual. I'm a college professor. I'm not supposed to believe in things beyond what I can see and touch. And yet, I think that has also harmed intellectual spaces as well. When you hang out in a university space and you see the way academics compete with one another and over what, I think it's simplistic, facile, and rather ridiculous. And there's a much deeper reality to what it is we're doing that we don't all see. It's funny. I went to an Egyptology. I was at ASOR. It's a conference for people who study the ancient world. And I was there in one of the Egypt and Nubia panels. And I said, it's so funny that now, I would never have thought this when I was in my early 20s or 30s. But now I'm there at 52 and I'm looking at this. I'm like, it's just a past lives regression therapy session. And we're all here trying to understand these ancient spaces and devoting our whole lives to them. We never ask each other why we're devoting our whole lives to this ancient world that we particularly are attracted to, but we do. And to our deficit, right? We're not making gazillions of dollars because we're obsessed with the ancient world. So in many ways, I now see it as this weird past life sort of therapy. And I can't say, I would never go up to the microphone and say that. I'm saying that on a podcast with you now about spiritual belief. I'm fine with that. But it's I see much more now. And I think that's the way it should be. When you're a child, you're interested in childish things. When you're a young adult, in your 20s and 30s, you see things in a certain way because you have to. You have to put your head down and work and make the money, and you need to be materialist. Then when you get a little older and not that much older, and you start to go through some real life crises. Everyone in their early 40s goes through some real life crises. Just look around. Divorces abound, and people have kids born with difficulties. All of the learning differences come out. All of the parents getting old. I mean, early 40s are tough, and shit goes down. When that stuff goes down, it's, what do they say? There's no atheist in a foxhole. But it's interesting to see how that materialist, that hard Richard Dawkins materialism does shift. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I think we're all on these journeys and these lives that we're here for, and we'll do it again and again and again. And
I like how you put that. It's interesting. I've often said on this channel, when I'm kind of sharing my heart about nihilism, that it's interesting. I subscribe to it as, I think, the most accurate way to perceive reality, but I also say you can't live there. And there's something about life that, whether it really is magical and transcendent in any way, and I don't think that it is, but it feels at times like it is. Like, for example, I was there at the birth of my four babies, and just looking at your child's beautiful face, their eyes, looking at the sunset, when two people in love are making love, just looking at cycles of life, death, all this stuff. You look at life, and it just feels like there's poetry there. And a lot of the people in my community, the deconverting community, we've talked about how when you deconvert and you escape Christianity, there's like this groundswell of emotion of like, what happened to me? Why did I love this psychopathic Yahweh character? And why did I think this was so good that he was going to save me from hell? But actually, most of my friends are going to go there anyway. You realize like there's so much in me that comes out, and you become so much more poetic, and your life in general becomes poetic. And just the fact that you need to save your time or use it wisely, because like this life is so short, and I thought I had another one coming, and now I realize I don't have another one coming, I don't think. Therefore, every moment counts. It has to count. And it just feels like that poetry and that beauty and that make it count. And you're like, well, why am I making it count? It doesn't matter if I make it count or not. In 500 years, no one's going to know my name. It doesn't really matter. But it's like, but it matters to me, and it matters to my loved ones. And that urgency and the poetry that comes out makes you kind of think, I might be a nihilist in philosophy, but practically I don't live there. Or otherwise, you just, you wouldn't show up and create poetry. Like, what's the point of poetry? What's beauty all about? There's no reason for it if it's just pure nihilism. It's a fascinating place to be. It really is.
and I've been there, and I have been there. I'm not there anymore, but I have certainly been there. And for decades, I was, a good decade, a little more, I was there, maybe 2 decades. And for a variety of reasons, I don't think everybody gets out of that space, but I think a lot of people do. But to leave that abusive relationship, and in this book, The Good Kings, I talk about um, obsession with the pharaohs of Egypt. I talk about obsession with patriarchs as a love affair that you have to walk away from because it's destroying you, but you love it. You love him so much, but you have to walk away. And it's very much like walking away from an evangelical reality. I had to walk away from the Catholic Church in the same way. And when you walk away, you have to walk away from all of it. When I walked away from my marriage, I left even furniture, all furniture behind. I just left it all behind because in a way, it was all tainted. And I even bought new clothes and I just needed new everything, right? And a new beginning, a fresh start. And I think that makes sense. So when one leaves, you are stripped down like Ishtar going down into the underworld. Every piece of armor taken off one by one until she is nothing more than a piece of human flesh who is raped in the middle of the night. And that was her reality. The only reality was that materialist survival. And then she slowly walks out and puts things back on. But there is this nadir of essentials of the human body and what it is you need, not what you want, but what it is you need to survive. And then you can find that strength in this mortal coil, to quote Shakespeare, in which we find ourselves. And then you can slowly trudge back out of that and build again without all of, or negotiating what is tainted. That's the hardest part. Build again some sort of magical truth that gives meaning to your world. And if that is the face of your child, or a new love, then that's it. It doesn't. Then it's not just this world in a harsh nihilism. It is absolutely a world filled with meaning. But then how you rebuild that after the abuse and toxicity of a patriarchal religious core that you've escaped, but you haven't really, you still, it's the water in which all of us swim. So, that's why we're always like, I was just talking to my husband about how in Japan, he didn't get sick from any of the food. And then we come back here and everything is toxic. Everything is poison because the corporations have got to make their money, and every cow, pig, and chicken has been fed something horrible that is making us sick. And every vegetable is covered with something horrible that is a Roundup and genetic whatever that is making us sick. And we're all sick and we're all overweight. We're all inflamed all the time because the food itself is poison. If that's the water in which you swim, then it's very hard to negotiate around all of those things and build something that's yours and that is still yet filled with meaning.
Hmm.
It's hard. I can go into a Catholic church in Europe if it has a Michelangelo statue in it. No problem. Do I want to go into a Catholic church here that's got a 70s architectural vibe? Hell's no, because that's what I grew up with. I went to a church named after St. Cyril of Alexandria. I can't believe that was the church I grew up going to. St. Cyril of Alexandria was the asshole bishop who went after Hypatia, the learned woman of Alexandria in Egypt, and had her skinned alive by a mob of Christian zealots who believed that she was sinning by daring to question the natural history of this planet and seeing where the planet fit amongst the stars and all of these things. So it's gross. But so any of those churches, no, I have no interest in going in. And yet a European 12th century church I'm running to get into. It's so funny. So
it's funny you say, because I think I'd feel the same way about, like, I remember years ago when I was still a Christian, we took our family trip up to Montreal, and there was a big basilica up there. And I remember at the time thinking it was so beautiful. And even though at this point, obviously, it would mean a very different set of meanings to me, being that I've deconverted, it's just a building and nothing else. I think there's so much beauty in the fact that, as much as to me it's all variations of the mythology theme, it's still like this is our attempt to in some way pull ourselves up, and whether we're tricking ourselves or not, fooling ourselves on the biggest scales, we're trying to have a transcendent life, even though we're afraid perhaps that maybe it's not transcendent, or maybe there are things about our lives that we wish that could be so that just aren't so. But it is interesting.
There's such deep shame in this, such deep shame. How could I have been taken for such a shill?
Yeah.
And I really think that putting it in terms of human relationships, because that's what religion is, it's a larger human relationship, is the best. So that when I think of my first marriage, I'm like, oh my God, how could I not have seen that he was a sociopath with a secret life? What is wrong with me that I didn't see that? And the shame that I felt for years, I've since abandoned a lot of that, is very deep. And I think you feel that same shame for having believed that, these ridiculous stories that people tell you were absolutely true and that you had to follow them in a particular way. And so when you enter into another relationship of that kind, you are very wary. Anybody who has been divorced and has been dealt with deep betrayal, particularly somebody who was leading a life that was secret and that you didn't even know was there. And then when you go into another human relationship or another spiritual belief, you are extraordinarily gun shy, very, very wary. And you should be. That's the way it is. So these things are not surprising to me, that it's human protection.
I was curious, when you were talking earlier, you were referring to religious trauma, that it's the water we all swim in. When you look at your life and where you're at, where you've been, where you're going, what are some of the things that have been the biggest lessons you've learned about healing from religious trauma? And you mentioned autonomy. I'm sure that plays into a lot of them, but where are you with getting to a point where you feel like you are safe in your own skin and safe in your own thought life in terms of the biggest questions of life?
Oh my God, that's such a huge question. And I feel strangely safe right now, even though we are descending into exactly what these toxic religions create as their end game. And that end game is a toxic masculinity, patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, that exploits and consumes to the extent that it kills its own host. And you and me and billions of other people are here on this planet for the moment when we'll have a climate collapse because of it, and for the moment when many of us have already undergone economic collapses, but there will be economic collapses to come, and there are certainly political collapses. I think the ideological collapses go alongside that. And to have extracted oneself as much as one can, it is the water in which we swim, right? So it's that toxicity is everywhere. But to have extracted oneself from that space of exploitation and control, I think is everything, because at least you have distance in your mind, if not in your body and in your home, and your children are still. My son with special needs is, and not the physical special needs, he's dyslexic and ADHD, but he has to go to the public schools here, which suck and are all about no child left behind, which leaves every child behind. And I have to watch that occur, right? He's certainly not safe in this environment, but there is a sense of nihilism where I say, well, this is what needs to happen. This is what the system is built. This is why we're here. And so in a weird way, I'm quite sanguine at the end of the world to watch it all fall apart, which will be incredibly painful for all of us. I'm in a university system that has decided that it's there to connect with industry and protect its hedge fund more than it is to educate. And every university system in the United States is the same. There might be little liberal arts colleges that believe in their mission of education first and foremost, but trust me, they'll be closing their doors in this capitalist society very soon because they can't maintain the cost of what that is. And to watch people celebrate the murder of a CEO of a health insurance company is an extraordinary thing. It has united the United States in a way that nothing else can, because everyone unites on who and what is evil. And that's kind of an amazing thing to see. So we are here at the beginnings of what I think is an anti-patriarchal revolution, a big human revolution, like the agricultural revolution of 10,000 some years ago, like the industrial revolution of 1,000 some years ago. If you want to go back that far, I think you could, maybe 2,000. And now with this anti-patriarchal revolution, we're all here. And I think even if you are a nihilist, materialist, I think you still see the meaning and the point of what it is we're here for. It doesn't mean you sacrifice your children to it, but it does mean you see the people around you reacting with fear and greed to take theirs to survive. And for what? And that you can reject that and then start a garden in your backyard and be like, okay, so this is what I'm going to do instead. And you can make those choices. So in a way, my answer to how I found myself within, my own rejection of an oppressive religion is to very much put myself in community, and to put myself deeper in community than I had before, to instead of looking at the homeless person as a sinner who deserves what he gets, to instead see that homeless person as me, as us, as our society, as a symptom of what it is that we are, and somebody who actually cannot handle the demands and toxicity of this patriarchal world. And that is comforting to me. And it sounds really dark. And my mind does go to dark places, and I'll hang out with my family and they're like, can you please stop talking now? And not everyone can handle that level of darkness. But for whatever reason, I don't know, I'm okay with it. And
Yeah.
And so that's where I go, because this is something, just like when one gets divorced, you have to walk through a fire that leaves everything from your old life behind. You have to burn that old life to the ground and you go to a new space. And we are doing that as a society, and we are burning it to the ground, and it's happening all around us. And you can see in that, you can be very afraid when you see that, or you can find the opportunity within that crisis and try to find the joy within that world. And, I was listening to NPR like 10 years ago, and there was this wonderful man who was talking about how, he was probably like 60 years old. He's like, look, I've lived through recessions. This was for 2008. I think that was when this was being discussed. He's like, I've lived through recessions. When there's a recession, you just don't go out to eat. You're not partying as much. You're hanging out at home. You're making soup. We call it cozy time. And we just can, and he was a gay man. So he has a community that people in their patriarchal nuclear families do not understand and cannot understand. And we need to understand more and more. So he has a community. He's built a family. He's like, we will, know that somebody doesn't have a job and that person doesn't have a job. One person does. And we connect together as a community and we call it cozy time. And we make soup and we have a garden and we connect with each other. And it makes you realize what is more important in this world than anything else. So everyone right now, I can see it all around me. I can see people going, okay, so this is the reality. It's just a smash and grab world. We're going to just say it out loud. That's what it is. That's what these religions are. They're smash and grab power oppression to get you to produce and do willingly so that you can be exploited more easily. That's all they are. They're corporate institutions to just take from you. And once you leave that and see that, and you're in the matrix and all you see are the ones and the zeros, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that's the world. Well, find your community and build something with that community. And if you create a new magical religious spirituality in that community, great. If you don't, but you create a moral connection with what you think the world should be and you make it now, great. And that's where I go. So, and that's with my students at UCLA. It's being chair of the department. It's my home life environment. It's all of those things. So like my son, I'm not like, I'm going to get you a tutor and we're going to make sure that you can do all of the things that the No Child Left Behind training demands. I'm not doing that. I'm like, okay, what do you want to do? How do you want to deal with this? Because I see that you don't want to do this and you want to do that. How can we deal with this? And I have a way that is freaking out a lot of my colleagues, friends, and my parents. They're like, how could you not participate in this? I'm like, I will not browbeat my child to participate in an oppressive education system that is as ideological as anything else. Ideology is everywhere. It doesn't have to be religion. It's everywhere. And the rejection has to go quite deep. And one has to be very fearless and I can say this because I have resources and I can be like, I'll start a business for my son. It's something everyone can do, right? So it's my own privilege that allows me to talk like this as well. I understand that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Going back for a second to the concept of reincarnation a little bit, could you just clarify what do you think happens? Or I know we can't say for sure. I'm just saying in the best guess concept. What do you expect would be your best guess for what is going to happen when you die? Do you think you actually go anywhere?
Yeah, I do. And I don't think it's an automatic, like, here we go kind of thing. I mean, I speak to the dead. Do you talk to the dead?
I don't think I do, no.
You don't have any dead grandparents or parents or anybody?
My father passed about 5 years ago. I don't have conversations with him, but he certainly comes to mind.
Yeah.
Do you mean it literally or metaphorically speaking to him?
I don't know, like dad would have loved that, or oh, that's for you, dad, or something like little conversations with the dead. And I think that's for somebody who's left the oppression of religious corporate world behind. Speaking to the dead is the gateway back to something that is of a spiritual community. So I think that the dead, this is what I think. The dead hang around. The dead are there as in some sort of energetic form. Energy comes in, energy goes out, and this energetic consciousness is hanging around for a bit, and they're there. And then when we die, I think some of the dead are there to help us on our way. On our way to what? I'm not exactly sure, but I think it is on our way to some other reality. And if you can mess with space, then why can't you mess with time? The more we learn about quantum physics and energy in and energy out and where things go in multiple dimensions, why can't our consciousness move to another dimension in space and time? Does that mean that it's a way for me to come for myself with not seeing the loss of my own consciousness? Perhaps, and yet I don't remember any of my past lives. even though I'm an Egyptologist and I have suspicions, but but I don't remember them. Like, I will remember speaking to you, right? That's not going to happen. So it is an utter loss of what you were. You will lose it. It's not like something you get to keep. It's not something that necessarily comforts me, to know that I have to do it all again. And because it's not easy, right? It's not easy going through childhood. There's a reason we forget if we do forget, because we can't handle that with us. And I kind of think of it like a Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings reality, where he comes back after his great fight with the Balrog, and he's transformed, and then they're like, Gandalf, and he's like, oh yes, that was my name. That kind of understanding of, you've forgotten who you were and you go someplace else, but you're still kind of that thing, but you're in a different time and space. So it's
Hmm.
it's a wishy-washy way of understanding that energy doesn't go away. Energy lasts and is maintained. And we go in and out of spaces. And I also think of these things as a kind of karmic reality, cause and effect, and that we're all part of larger systems. So I don't know. I've never tried to actually verbalize what it is that I believe of late. But yeah. And then when you get down to that, and you're like, think of Carl Sagan's billions and billions of stars. When you're thinking about our small reality in this tiny little edge of the Milky Way solar system, and that there are probably so many other humanoid or at least sentient life forms out there thinking many of the same questions. We're a part of a much larger community than we know. But I think the ancient people knew that. They had the night sky. We've taken away our night sky. In the Matrix, when they say we don't know who torched the sky first, if it was the robots or us, whatever, the AI or us. But we've already torched the sky. We can't see the stars. The sky has been well and truly torched. And I can go out and see a planet here or there if I'm lucky, and maybe Orion. But no one gets to see the Milky Way anymore unless you drive and drive and drive. And you have to be very careful about where you go. And then maybe you could see it. But in the ancient world, it was just, you were a part of it.
Yeah.
And that's why the magic is gone.
Sure.
We've made it go away. And it's helped our oppressors to keep us in this space where we don't see that we are part. When you see the face of your child, it's the same as seeing the Milky Way and being immersed in that. It actually changes the endorphins in your brain when you witness these things, that awe that is created in your mind when you look at the stars and you realize you are one tiny part of this giant thing and you feel it, right? That's what it's all about. Amazing that patriarchy has removed that from our experience.
Yeah, I would say I haven't experienced life the way you're describing, and I just landed philosophically in such a different place. But the one thing that what you're saying reminds me of, when you're referring to like speaking to family members that may have passed already. The thing that I think I kind of psychologically, emotionally, poetically do is it's kind of the reparenting yourself. There's a lot of things in my childhood that I go back and kind of, as it were, pretend I could go back through time and kind of just send a message and send myself an email, although it wasn't email back then, but send yourself a message and just be like, hey, it's going to be okay, but life's going to be different. It's going to shake the hell out of you. You're going to make it, but it's going to be hard. So brace yourself. And it's kind of that reparenting yourself and trying to heal some of that trauma, both religious trauma as well as just, cultural trauma. But it is fascinating how we all land very differently. And I think that the cool thing about deconversion that I like is that for a lot of us, unless you're really like an atheist who's also really trying to be a fundamentalist atheist of some sort, you're willing to say, you know what, we can land different places. The one thing we're not going to do is say, you must think like me or else you're going to burn for it. But to say, it's okay. If I've had atheists said, one guy was atheist, told a story, he said, hey, my wife's a witch. She deconverted too, but she's a witch now. Very different from what I'm used to in terms of atheist community, in terms of what people land on. But it's like, that's her journey. She felt most comfortable landing in that direction. Other people, it's going to be very different. And for some people, it's very generic, like just the Star Wars Force. Other people, it's a little more specific, like what you said. But I'm just curious, with where you're at with all this, what would you say are some of the either philosophies or just practical things you do that make you existentially most happy and most safe and most pleased with yourself and just pleased with how your life is going. And I don't mean like it's, real small things like, oh, the comfort food of eating a chocolate bar or something. I mean like the bigger life choices, but what makes you feel safest and happiest these days?
Yeah, I mean, so first I'll say that the philosophies that make me feel the safest would be, I love animism. I love I love an idea that you can, like Tolkien, stand next to a tree and find peace, right? And in that beauty and touch the tree is wonderful, right? And there are so few places where we can do that in the city of Los Angeles anymore, certainly. And I love Buddhism. I love the idea, even though most Buddhists are quite theist, I love the idea of a non-theist religion that you can do something for your own personal enlightenment. You look to yourself, you don't look to other people, you look to what your right speech, right action, and right thought are. And that brings me comfort. And I do try to live that way every day. And then as for what I do in this world that really brings me joy is I teach. I love I love teaching. And my teaching now is for instance, yesterday in my grad seminar, I missed the first half of the grad seminar because I was trying to get down the hall, and as chair of the department, there's all this drama, and two people stopped me, and I didn't make it to my grad seminar until an hour in. And I show up, and the guy who's leading the text is doing just fine without me. And I show up, and they're reading the text and having a great time, and I get to participate in the last hour. And that brought me great joy that I'm not there. Grad student experience is very similar as well, right? When you get a PhD, you're entering into a patriarchal, oppressive world in which you also give up your individuality and have to learn certain theories and certain ways of doing things in the classroom. And if you don't, you will be punished in some sort of way. And I try to create an anti-patriarchal classroom in which they have leadership. It's a student-led environment. It's their searching and their learning, which I think creates a much deeper relationship with the text, with the reading, with the work, whatever it is that we're trying to do, and is a little revolution of its own. So the teaching is also a mentoring, and it is a way of getting everyone around me to see the system as it is, and what can we do to create our community that is supportive, rather than the typical academic thing, which is to take each other down, to criticize each other, particularly in a grad school environment where you're nice to each other's face and then you backstab and talk shit about the other student to the professor or whatever it is, play favorites, create cliques. I'm not doing that. I won't do it. And I talk about that quite openly, that we're not doing that. And if I find out people are doing it, I'm like, who's doing that? And let's stop that and create a different community. So that community that I've helped to foster and build at UCLA, that makes me very happy. Makes me very happy. And then I suppose the other things that I try to do the same in my writing. I just came out with this book, which is a giant beast of a book, and it took me like 10, 12 years to create. And it's a huge contribution to the field of pieces that no one will be able to photograph again. And I put in 980 photos in there, and I did so with the help of a larger community. And I am so pleased that it exists. I am just chuffed that it is out there in the world. And then books like this, I have another one I'm working on now. It'll be about Nefertiti, and I connect the past and the present. And I do everything my training told me I should not do. How dare you make the past political? How dare you think that history writing is political? And of course, it's nothing but. But once one breaks up with the oppressive system and sees things in a different way, then you write in a different way, you produce in a different way. And people criticize me for it. And I go to conferences and people are like, oh my God, the Cooney, blah, blah, blah. And they make fun of me and they belittle. And that's fine. And I find a perverse sort of joy in bringing that revolutionary spirit to the world. And then the last thing I'll say is that, you were talking about what's your legacy when you're gone. And we do have legacies. And I'm not saying I'm working towards a legacy, but I play a long game. I always play a really long game. And if I don't get what I want or hope for right away, there are possibilities of getting it later. So this book that I keep holding up, it was a failure. No one wanted to read me saying I'm a recovering Egyptologist and I have broken up with the Pharaoh. No one wants to read that because it's very much like giving an evangelical a book about, I've left the church and I don't want to be a part of it. I can't give that to my colleagues and have them go, yay, I want to read that. So I have to have produced that with a long game in mind that this will last. It's printed, it exists, and that thing that I had to say will then percolate through the air for years. And it will land and find its place probably after I'm dead. And that's okay. So I like contributing to a cultural thought pattern in a longer term way. And that brings me, I can kind of see it, that what I'm producing will be there for generations to come. Maybe not more than two, maybe just one after my death. If a generation is 20 years, okay, fine, we'll give it two. And then it'll move on to other people and other energies. But like that I want to be part of the change towards creating a planetary cozy time.
Hmm. I love it. I love it. I'm just going to say two quick things here, and then I'll pass it to you to give us a final word. But I love the fact that you're talking about politics, and I love how your subtitle there is "Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World," and it's like what a very apropos title. I know you wrote it before in 2021, but what an appropriate time frame we're in. And it goes back to that quote. What is it? Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And it seems like we are unfortunately dooming ourselves in this culture, but in terms of your legacy, just to also say, I think it's so cool. I know we didn't talk about this yet, but just assume that your children are growing up with such a different perspective. The idea of like the autonomy, the lack of fundamentalism, the lack of threats, the lack of the guilt. What a beautiful gift. And if you want to say a word about that, and then anything else that comes to mind, we'll wrap up. But that's such a cool gift because I know for myself, my kids, I see in myself, I see what I was about to give them when I was a Christian, what I was going to impose on them. I got out early enough that I did not. I was able to rescue myself, as it were, and also to rescue them before it got too far gone. But what a cool thing to say to somebody, it's your life, it's your choice, and do what's best for you, not what I impose on you and what I threaten you with.
Yeah. I always say when I'm talking about patriarchy, because it's such a scare word and it makes most men feel very uncomfortable. And I always say patriarchy is very bad for men too. It's one of the lines in my book, The Good Kings, which is an anti-patriarchal screed, if you like. And I love that you said this, that you extricated yourself from a patriarchal system before you became the instrument of the patriarchy, which would have done you no good psychologically, emotionally, physically. It's brutal on men as well to be put into that position of having to hold the line for everyone else and to browbeat everyone into submission. It's brutal. So it's a and that's what the Boy Scouts of America were. That's what the Catholic Church abuse system was about, right? And that's why all of these weird gay pedophiles joined the church, because there was no other place for them. And then they created some weird, horrible community of oppressive control. Patriarchy is not good for men, and it doesn't create happy masculinity. It creates this horrible toxic masculinity. And now what? We're in a world where if you can afford it, everyone's taking testosterone, drives a big muscle car with weird testicles hanging off the back of the truck. And it's like, come on, it's really sad that men have been absolutely cut off from their own humanity because they have to be the gulag guards of the whole system. And people are seeing it, but
Yeah.
it really is one by one by one. And as for my son, I will not lie. It's not like I go through this and say, "Oh, it'll be fine." I'm terrified on his behalf every day. I think it is important, however, that I say, whatever it is, you will be safe. I'm going to help you come up with a
Mm.
plan B. We're going to start a business together. We're going to do this or that. This education system that you are required by law to go to, this place that tells you without explicitly saying you are stupid every day. We reject it, both of us, but we'll get through it and then figure out a way to have him lead a life that is of meaning don't get me wrong, it's not easy to exist, certainly as a child, within patriarchal spaces, and not be damaged by it. We're all damaged by it, all of us, all of us.
We started with some fun questions. Ask you one quick 30-second fun question. If you were to write one more book and it had nothing to do with Egyptology, just completely different, nothing that you are working on or ever have worked on, what do you think would be a fun book to consider writing?
I mean, I think I would write a book on how to be a woman of power in the world and negotiate patriarchal systems, how to hack them, how to move around them, how you have to exist within the water, but you can transcend it in some way, and how you can get through this with your soul intact. And I think it would be like a how-to kind of book. And
But very light reading.
I'm not much into light reading. It's really kind of ridiculous. I have multiple books going right now. One is Keith Thomas, Religion and the Decline of Magic, which is all about the move between a very magical Catholic space and a much more browbeating Catholic and or Protestant space of religion and patriarchal. It was patriarchal either way, but the magic went away. So yeah, I'm not much into. I should have more light reading, but I don't.
Well, we appreciate what you're bringing.
Yeah.
Your voice is obviously so critical to so many of these discussions. And again, I want to thank you for what you've been doing already for our community. So many that would be looking at my channel are already looking at Myth Vision and channels like it. So thank you for what you're doing to sort of help us understand the mythology that the ancient Near East was cultivating, and that we've sort of, in many ways received this inherited, adopted, evolved religion of Christianity. But thank you so much for what you've been doing. It's been awesome. And I'll also wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Dr. Kara Cooney. Please, I'll have all the links beneath this video. Please go check out her great stuff, buy her book, support her in every which way. But Dr. Cooney, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. This was super fun.
Absolutely. Let's do it again sometime. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.